Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 183 of the Tick Bootcamp podcast. The title of today's interview is Pastoring Lyme, an interview with Pastor Dan Price. My name is Richard Johannesson.
And I'm Matt Sabatello.
Matt, this is a very interesting episode with a Christian pastor who went on this spiritual, emotional, and physical journey that was triggered by Lyme disease.
And Rich, Pastor Dan taught us so much. The first thing he talked to us about is how traditional doxy dosing is not enough. He then went on to talk to us about damage that can be done to the brain from Lyme disease and how to overcome it. He then talked to us about how he had to pivot from treatment to treatment until he finally found success and reached remission. And he even touched on the sexual transmission of Lyme disease.
And Matt, the most beautiful part of the story was the transformation Pastor Dan had gone through. He became a more empathetic pastor because he had his own emotional challenges that were triggered by Lyme. And he discovered some new talents where he is now a professional photographer. So without further ado, Matt, I'm happy to introduce Pastor Dan Price. Hey, Pastor Dan, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
We're really excited to have you. And just so that we can first identify why I'm calling you Pastor Dan, please share with our audience what you do primarily. I know you have a couple of jobs, but talk to us about your main job.
Yeah, so my main job, I work at a church in Bend, Oregon as an executive pastor, and I do music too. I've been doing that in a couple different churches for the past about 20 years. So that's been my main career. I've had a couple other careers on the side, but that's my main job there.
Well, talk to us about your secondary career, because we actually discovered you through some of the great work you're doing as a photographer and what you're posting on social media.
Yeah, so actually, and my secondary career relates to Lyme disease because it started because of Lyme. So that might be something to get into at some point here. But it's as a photographer, I do nature landscape photography, and that's primarily what's on my Instagram, but I shoot for a lot of big brands and companies and do a lot of work outside of my normal job because of what I've been able to do there. So yeah, it's a fun one.
So we're going to come back to that, of course. So talk to us about your childhood. Where did you grow up and what were your goals when you were growing up?
Yeah, so I grew up in Akron, Ohio, so Rust Belt town in the Midwest. As a kid, basically wanted to be a baseball player my whole life. So until I had an accident in high school, broke my back, and fortunately, I wasn't gonna make it as a pro baseball player anyways. But that sealed the deal with me. So just kind of had a normal, average, everyday lifestyle. Played outside a lot because this was before the computers existed, but we didn't have computers, we didn't have cell phones, so it was outside with the neighborhood kids playing baseball on makeshift field almost every day. So basketball if it was basketball season, football if it was football season. But as far as growing up, all I thought about was sports. So and outside stuff. That was my life.
So as an athlete and an outdoorsy kid, were you aware of ticks, and did you take any precautions to protect yourself from getting Lyme disease during your childhood?
Not at all. No, I don't think I actually had heard of Lyme disease until I became an adult. So as a kid, that wasn't even on our radar at all. No.
So let's talk about your college educational experience. Where did you go to college and what did you major in?
Yeah, so I went to a small school called Cedarville in Ohio, and I majored in communications and had a few different minors, all humanities based, because I leaned artistically, but then ended up doing some business stuff as well, and starting some small businesses and things. So communications, it was a major that I felt like I liked all the classes. It wasn't something that I had a dream to go into radio or newspaper or anything like that. But I just liked persuasive theory and rhetoric and the study of how people think and how you persuade people and what's going on behind the words that people are using. So
during your undergraduate experience, did you learn anything about ticks and Lyme disease? And were you, again, aware of any steps that you should be taking to protect your health from coming in contact with ticks?
Not at all. I had heard of Lyme disease by that point, but I didn't even know what it was or how you got it at all. So And looking back, it's kind of a shame because I know that where I was in Ohio, there's a lot of there are a lot of ticks, there's a lot of Lyme disease, and so no, it was not something that my community talked about. That I didn't have friends that I knew that had Lyme or that talked about it at all.
So where did your life and your career take you after you graduated from college?
Yeah, so after that, I started doing ministry stuff, which was for me not something that I ever wanted to do previously. I grew up in a house where actually my stepdad was a prison chaplain, and it was he like stepped out of a business career because he had this heart for prisoners, um, and trying to make a way for them to kind of repair the damage they've done in their life and make things right with God and with people that they've hurt. And so he left a business career to do that. And I saw just how hard that was. Never wanted to enter into ministry and stuff, but I had some opportunities that were in front of me that were kind of life-changing experiences with building into people. And that led me into taking a job at a church in Columbus, Ohio, as a youth pastor, and doing music stuff. I played in bands, so music was a pretty easy thing for me to kind of bring over to the church world as well. And then ended up in Michigan for several years, for about 15 years. And through that, then started doing the business side of the church that I was in. It grew a ton and needed more organizational help. And so I did staff management, organizational policy structure, all of that stuff. And became the executive pastor at that church, and then ended up coming out here about 3 years ago to Oregon. So
let's talk about your time in Michigan. Is that the time when you first started to show the symptoms of what you now know to be your Lyme disease?
Yeah. So, I was in Michigan, and I was honestly like pretty active, pretty outdoors, as much as I possibly could be. Played sports as an adult, played in basketball league, played softball and hiking and everything else that I could possibly do, disc golf. So I was outside, I was active, I was lifting weights. It's weird to look back on pictures of how strong I was, 7-8 years ago. Because I'd been lifting, 3 or 4 times a week. Our social life, I was married, I have 3 kids, and we were busy in a fun way. We had people over to our house all the time. I would say that now I'm probably more of an introvert than an extrovert, but then I felt like an extrovert. At least I was energized by people. We had people, seriously, probably 3 or 4 times a week at our house. Sometimes it was huge parties of 40 or 50 people all hanging out. So we were a very go type of family. Kids all, were active, played sports. Son played soccer, daughter played dance. So we were taking kids all over the place too. Just kind of living a normal young family type of life that was active.
All right, so you have this active family and you have this active professional life all sort of folding together. Mm-hmm. You're an extrovert, and you're in Michigan, right? And now, what did you know about ticks and Lyme disease in Michigan? Meaning, were there any health education programs, or were there any awareness programs in Michigan? Because we're aware of many people who got Lyme disease. In fact, one of our very good friends and one of the leaders in the Lyme community actually got bitten by a tick when she was visiting her husband's family in Michigan. So obviously it's a huge problem. Were you aware of the problem before you got sick?
At that time, I didn't know of anyone that had Lyme. And again, it wasn't something that I heard anyone talk about. Wasn't it? And at that time, I honestly didn't even know that it was a tick-borne illness. And so, no, I was pretty unaware. I would, the only reason we used off or DEET or anything like that was to ward off the mosquitoes, because the mosquitoes are pretty bad in Michigan. But it had nothing to do with ticks or disease or any of that. So I was unaware.
Your symptoms. What were your early symptoms, and how are they affecting this very active life that you and your family were living together?
Yeah, so it was 2012. It was late in the year. I think it was like December, and my symptoms, I feel like, are atypical compared to other people that I've talked to. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but at least the people that I know, it wasn't quite like mine. But I remember getting a fever, a low grade fever, in the 100-degree, about there range. And it honestly didn't really go away for more than a day or so at a time for 4+ years. And so I started feeling sick. I honestly thought I had a flu. It was Michigan. It was starting to get cold. It was flu season. And so I was sick. And I remember after 2 weeks of just having this constant fever and feeling this fatigue that was just beyond any fatigue that I've ever felt before. What is going on here? I don't understand. Like, this sickness is not going away. And then it probably took me a month and a half before I went to see a doctor, because I was just like, what is going on? And I started aching. You ache when you have a flu, but I started aching really bad and not being able to sleep. My joints were hurting. And so symptoms. And I honestly thought, man, this is a flu that's not going away. The doctors kind of didn't take it seriously at first either. And so they're just kind of like, well, it looks like you have the flu, just kind of deal with it. You'll get better. And I'm like, okay. But it kept going.
So then let's talk about that moment in your life where you have this low grade fever for a long time, and you're feeling fatigue unlike anything you've ever felt before. Mm. First, talk to us about how those symptoms were impacting your family, meaning what impact was it having on your wife and what impact was it having on your children?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's probably honestly like one of the hardest things for me to think about, because for me, I can deal with being sick on my own and everything, but I know that it impacted my family a lot. And so the emotional toll that honestly that took on me was probably greater than just me being sick. And so my wife is a champ. She honestly went into caretaker mode. We didn't know what was going on, but she knew I was sick. And I can't, I know there's so many stories of couples not being able to make it through severe sickness like this. And I attribute it all to her and her character and who she is, that she just stuck with me, took care of us. She stepped up into being really the mom and dad for our kids in a lot of ways.
Well, give us some detail on that. So
yeah.
your wife, how did your wife's life change as a result of now having to become your caretaker when you were dealing with your Lyme disease symptoms?
That's a great question. It changed a ton. So she, I would go to work and I was honestly like so sick that I felt like, you know what, maybe I shouldn't be working, but I had to provide for my family. And so I just went to work every day, even though I felt terrible. And so she did everything else though. She was working as well. And so she was working for a financial planning agency. But she would take the kids to all their sports and school and pick them up and drop them off and arrange everything and think through everything. I didn't realize it at the time, but my processing was becoming slower. And so she was honestly taking over the processing of our family schedule and all of that for me. I would come home and honestly just be so tired. I would go to bed and try to sleep on the couch so that I was around the family, even though I wasn't able to get up and really do anything. But she would basically cover for me. And so she did all the parenting. If there's discipline, she would talk to the kids about what needs to change. If there was fun stuff that, they honestly, as a family, did a lot less when I became sick. And so, but the kids did need to have some fun in their life. And she would take them out on her own, maybe with one of her friends, and, go to the water park in the summer or whatever it was. But she basically took over as the parent. And so for me, the kids knew I was sick. They were gracious with me, honestly. They were great. My littlest one, so he was born in 2012. So just a little bit before I was sick. And so he would come and just sit with me on the couch and that was easy. The two older ones, I honestly felt so bad that I couldn't engage in ways that they experienced love. And so like playing, being active with them, just doing things outdoors like they would have loved to have me do. So that was tough, honestly. So for me, mentally, emotionally, seeing my family not have me at 100%, but instead probably at like 20%, was a tough thing for me, knowing that my wife was carrying double the weight of parenting and also taking care of me too. So she, we would share duties, and then it, as far as the house and everything, all the chores and everything that you think of doing as a family, it was all kind of on her to carry.
So talk to us about the emotions that you were feeling as a result of your wife essentially becoming the sole parent and the sole caretaker of your house. How did you feel emotionally?
Yeah, I mean, I felt guilty, honestly. And I know that it wasn't my fault that I was sick, but I felt guilty, and there's nothing I could do about feeling that way. So I saw what she was doing. Um, I knew that I could never repay her for what she was doing. I knew that she wasn't doing it because she uh, was just doing it out of duty, but she loved me and loved our family and wanted to. So that almost made it harder, just seeing her attitude through it. Um, but it was tough because she was tired too. I mean, when you're a caretaker, you become really, really tired really quick. And I think she was dealing with her own stuff that I couldn't even engage and help her with because of the toll that it was taking on us as a family.
Now, do you believe your wife was suffering from caretaker burnout at any time? And if she was, how did that affect you emotionally?
Yeah, I think she was, especially like in the latter years of me being really sick. And for me, that was at the point that I was becoming cognitively slower and less aware of anything, honestly. And so looking back, I can see how it affected her. But I also feel like I was just barely surviving. So it was hard for me to even like engage in understanding what was going on around me. Um, but she did have some really, really great friends. And I can't say this enough. Like, we are just thankful for some of the community that we had. We had some amazing friends that saw where we were, that took care of us in the middle of that. So I felt like as I was being cared for by Suzanne, she was being cared for by our other friends in ways that I didn't know until I looked back and was kind of out of that season of just being really slow and not being able to process well. Um,
So
we had a
let's,
couple. Oh, go for it.
I'm sorry. Let's talk about how you felt as a parent. Now, you were feeling guilty as a result of not upholding your part of the bargain with your wife in your marriage. How were you feeling now that you were unable to be the parent you wanted to be?
Yeah, I mean, the same. I felt guilty, and and at the same time, I knew it wasn't my fault, but it, uh, I felt guilty that I wasn't more available for sure. I know that there are so many situations where parents do have a choice to engage with their kids and decide not to. And for this, it was tough for me to want to, but not be able to. And so even now, honestly, I feel like some of my kids lost some of their childhood experience of having a dad. And I can't make up for that, but I do try to be really intentional, engage with them because, my oldest one's 17 now. And so he's almost out of the house. And um, my daughter is 13. And so I want them to have a childhood where they look back and they said, my parents did everything they could to be involved in my life. There was a season there that my dad couldn't, but when he could, he engaged. And so I didn't want that to honestly become a habit that kept living out, because I feel like you could get out of the habit of what it means to be a dad by being sick. And then once you feel better, you could kind of stick to your own, you could be more selfish, honestly. And I felt the temptation for that. But I've really wanted to choose intentionality with my family and with my kids.
What impact do you believe that the emotion of guilt that you are feeling as a result of not being able to uphold your obligations to your wife and not being able to uphold your obligations to your children had on the development of your illness?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's it's so hard for me to say because there's so many factors that play into what sick was for me. So when you define what is Lyme disease and what is it like to have Lyme disease, it's so many things, because it's physical, it's mental, it's emotional, it's spiritual, it's all those things for me wrapped in one, and they're all hurting in different ways. And so um, whether the guilt caused anything with my sickness, or it was a result, or was combined and was some of each, I feel like mentally I was deteriorating, and my emotional state was deteriorating as well, and guilt was part of that. And so I was frustrated, um, because you know you you get to this point where like I was ready to, if I was going to die because of this, I had kind of made peace with the fact that, okay, I could die from this, but the fact that it was just going on, and it was the sickness that seemed like it wasn't going to have an end. I didn't know if I would ever get better. I didn't know if I would see any rate of recovery at all. I thought this might be my life. And so honestly, that, and knowing that I couldn't do what I felt like I should be able to do for my family, combined to become a frustrating thing that probably snowballed into a bigger and bigger deal as I got sicker and sicker. And so it was something that, like, I felt frustrated a little bit at the beginning, and then, man, by a few years into this, I'm like, I didn't know what to do. I was helpless.
So Dan, let's talk about what you were able to do. You said that you needed to provide for your family, and as a result of that, you were going to work, even though you weren't sure that you had the capacity to work. How
Yeah.
are things going as the executor pastor at the church you were working at in Michigan during this window of time when your symptoms were developing?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I uh, I felt like I was doing the um, bare necessities to be able to get my job done, and was making it happen through sheer will. And I had some good help around me too. So I had an executive assistant that saw that I was sick, and that was really aware of what I needed and how to prepare me for meetings. And so it's kind of crazy. She would collect my notes after a meeting, make notes for the next meeting that I had with someone, and prep me 15 minutes before I had the next meeting with someone, and just kind of like walk me through what I needed to do. And so I felt like, between having help that was really good, and just knowing that, like, if I don't do this, I'm not sure how my family's going to get taken care of, and forcing my way to be at work. Um, it was tough though, because I felt like I wasn't giving anything beyond just baseline function to the people I was serving.
So talk to us about, you're the spiritual leader of a community at the time.
Mhm.
How were you failing to meet the needs of that community because you were sick, and what impact was that having on you emotionally?
Yeah, um, that's a great question. I think it would depend on uh, the different people that I was serving. So we had a staff of about like 50 or 60 people, and my primary focus was taking care of them. And so we had other people that were speaking on the weekends, preaching and teaching, doing all of that. But my focus was on the staff. And so I felt like uh, it was like triage more than it was development of people. And so I was triaging situations. I was trying to figure out how to prioritize my time when it was so limited, and when my energy was so limited. And so, um, I think some people were probably served okay with that, and then some people um, honestly weren't developed as much as they could have been if I would have been 100%.
Now let's talk about where you were spiritually. As a result of your developing illness, as a result of your failure to meet your obligations to your wife, to your children, and now to the community of people that you were serving, did that cause any doubt to creep into your spirit?
Yeah, I mean, doubt, I don't think so, honestly, I know that sounds weird. It seems like there would be doubt. But my faith was pretty strong. Not because I felt like I was strong in that, but because when I look at my faith and what I see in the Bible, I see people suffering and I see instruction on what it means to suffer. And I see a hope where there isn't suffering anymore. And so I kind of clung to the stuff that I felt was true in the middle of my suffering. That doesn't mean that I wasn't angry or upset or hard that I was going through it, because I don't want to go through this. And so I think back to, there's a character in the Bible called Job, going through just crazy, crazy suffering that God was allowing. And there was a purpose behind it and everything, but he wasn't allowed to see that for most of it. And so I kind of clung to stuff like that in scripture. I'm like, well, this doesn't go against my faith. This actually fits into my faith pretty well what I'm going through. I'm still angry and upset about it. But it wasn't something that made me doubt, I guess.
So you were grieving at the time, and part of
Mhm.
that grief was that you were angry, and part of that grief was a process of sadness.
Yep.
But was there any bargaining during that grieving period? Meaning, were you bargaining with God, or were you bargaining with anyone? And during that process, did you ever have any doubt about whether or not you would get better?
Oh, you know what? I can't really remember if I did any bargaining with God. It's definitely possible. So much of that, my mental, I mean, on the one hand, you're laying in bed every second that you're not working when you're that sick, and so you have a lot of time to think and everything, but your thoughts aren't that clear, and my memory wasn't very good, and so I'm not sure exactly what kind of thoughts I had pertaining to making a deal with God, but I definitely felt like I wasn't going to get better for almost the whole time, and so my whole thought process was like, I'm not going to get better. What does that mean for the future? I was okay with, I was honestly, and I don't mean to be flippant about this. I was honestly prepared to die if need be, but living forever with a sickness like this was way worse than that in my mind. If it was going to be, man, I have 40 years of being sick like this. Oh, I didn't know how to face that. And so I did feel like if that was the answer that, after talking to all these doctors, if that was going to be the answer that they were going to give me, I didn't know how I was going to deal with that.
So then talk to us about how many doctors you saw and what type of diagnoses you received prior to receiving your Lyme disease diagnosis.
Yeah. So I probably saw 4 or 5 doctors before I actually got a Lyme diagnosis there. And, my first doctor, he was my primary care physician. He's a great guy, but he hadn't previously seen Lyme patients that he knew of. And so that wasn't on his radar. And instead, he tested me for every conceivable cancer that was out there. Because they saw, honestly, when I went in, after that first time, I went back in, a few weeks later. I was like, I'm still sick. I still have the flu. Or don't know what to do. So he started doing blood work on me and testing me for cancers and um, lupus and cat scratch fever and a couple other diseases that I can't even remember. Everything turned back negative. So it came back to me negative, and it was kind of crazy. I went to a podiatrist because I had joint pain, especially in my feet, that wasn't allowing me to sleep. And I was told by the podiatrist, it looks like you have arthritis, but you're only, 35. So this doesn't really make sense. Um, I had kidney stones and thought maybe this fever is being caused by some kind of infection. And so they looked at that, blasted the kidney stones, and then nothing changed. And so I kept going to different specialists based on the symptoms that I was seeing. None of them really tied it together to this is all the same thing, or this is all kind of related. And so there's a reason for this that's bigger than kind of what we're seeing here. Frustrating for sure.
So, Dan, I want to revisit the faith and doubt question with you, only because
Mhm.
you're a pastor, and I think it's important for us to ask questions within your realm of expertise. So you said to me a little while ago that you didn't lose faith, meaning you didn't lose faith in God, and that you had your touchstones, and you had biblical characters like Job that you could rely on. But it does sound to me that you lost faith in your ability to heal, that you were going to sort of be sick and perhaps even die. Why do you think your faith as a Christian and as a pastor didn't help you to believe that you were going to have the ability to heal when you were in the throes of these challenges?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, the basic answer is that in my faith, healing comes in the next life, as far as complete healing. And I had seen too many people that had strong faith that passed away. I'd been in hospitals. I'd been with families as loved ones passing. My dad passed away when I was 4 from cancer. And so I knew that that was part of life. And also when I looked at scripture, it was consistent with that. And so I didn't feel like there was any promise from God that you're going to be healthy and live out your dreams. That doesn't mean that I didn't want to, and that I obviously don't want to go through Lyme disease again. I don't want to face health issues like this again. But there's no promise from God or when I see what I see in the Bible, there's no promise there that in this life that's going to be healed, but it is going to be healed someday. And so that's where my hope was.
Now, when you were going to all these doctors and you were not getting a diagnosis, what impact did that have on your faith? And did you believe that that was consistent with the promises or the lack of promises about the ending of suffering that you were reading in scripture?
Yeah. I don't know if it really, I know it's weird to say, I don't know if it really had much of an impact on my faith. Because I feel like I'd seen this before with other people, and I wasn't special compared to the people that I've served or the people that have gone through hard things.
But did you believe your suffering had some purpose? I mean, when you were in the throes of this and you were feeling terribly and you were failing your wife and failing your children and failing the people that you were serving at work, I mean, did the suffering have some purpose in your mind?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because I felt like for a while I didn't know. And so that's hard if you feel like you're suffering needlessly and you don't see a purpose in it. And sometimes I don't know if we get the answers on this side, but there are many things that happen that I do see a purpose for my life, something that came out of that changed who I am, that changed the people around me. And so I am thankful for that.
I'm going to ask you to pause on that for a minute, because we are going to talk about that. But I just want you to just sort of bring us back to what you were feeling when you were in the throes of your chronic disease and you don't have a diagnosis and you're failing everyone and you're feeling guilty. Did you feel at that moment that there was a purpose for your suffering, or did you doubt that?
Yeah, I doubted that. I didn't know if there was. And so where I didn't doubt that, my faith was real and that God was real, I did doubt that, like, all right, this may or may not have any purpose at all. I'm just struggling to survive here. I don't see, I mostly see people hurting around me because of my sickness. And so you're in the depths of despair there. You're just thinking like, there's not anything that I wake up and feel like, oh man, this was a good day. This was, everything was hard. And so even the things that were moments of joy, or something that happened that was good, it was still, you're sick while you're in the middle of that. If a kid is achieving something at school or sport or something, that's awesome. It's fun to see your kid be happy in some way. But man, I feel like I'm dying here. I feel like I'm unable to get better and can barely function and can't even celebrate with them the way that I want to. So yeah, absolutely. There were probably years in there where I didn't know, man, does my suffering make sense at all? Does this sickness have any purpose?
So, Pastor Dan, I want to go back to your primary care physician who tested you for cat scratch fever or Bartonella, which is a co-infection or a tick-borne illness that goes along with Lyme disease.
Yeah.
Did your primary care physician or any other doctor think Lyme in parallel to cat scratch fever?
No, Lyme wasn't anything that I recall being part of the discussion at all. And I know it wasn't something that I was tested for at that time. And so I wasn't part of it.
Did you have cats? Did the doctor ask you your history about, being around animals and being scratched by a cat? What led your doctor to think cat scratch fever?
I'm not sure. I think by that time, that was probably one of the later things that he like threw into the mix of get tested for this, because we had run out of every other kind of cancer that he was looking for. We'd gone through pretty much the whole list. And I think he was just trying to do due diligence and go through more. So no, we didn't have cat, we didn't have pets. And so there wasn't any, that wasn't even close to the first thing that he tested for, probably because of those reasons.
Did you get any diagnosis before Lyme disease that you thought might actually be the real cause behind your illness?
Yeah, the one that I was most hopeful for, that I was like, this could be the answer, was having a kidney stone. Because I was like, okay, I did read that you can get infections if the stone is in a certain spot, and that can cause fevers that are ongoing until you get it taken care of. And so for me, that was the one. And my doctors honestly were pretty hopeful too, like maybe this is the thing. And so that's the other ones. I honestly had no idea. Cancer, I had no idea if those were going to be something that came up positive or not. I was kind of hoping for anything to honestly be true, so that we actually had an action plan and knew what our next step was. Not knowing was harder for me.
So how long was it until you finally got your Lyme diagnosis?
It was 2 years.
And what doctor or group of doctors eventually diagnosed you?
Yeah, so my primary care physician referred me to the Bourne Clinic in Grand Rapids, and they do a lot of different types of care, but they do a lot of preventative care too. But I went in my first meeting with Dr. Bourne. I told her my symptoms, and she immediately went to Lyme. She said, "This sounds just like Lyme." So clinically, off the bat, she thought it was Lyme. And then she did a test. I think it was the Western blot. Sent that away, and it came back positive a couple weeks later. And so I met with her again, and I honestly, like when she said, "Okay, I've got some news for you. Your Lyme test came back positive," I got excited because I didn't know what Lyme was. And so I was like, yes, this is finally, we have an answer here after a couple of years of this. And she said, hold on, this isn't something to honestly get excited about, because this is a tough disease that some people don't recover from, and it's going to be a long road ahead.
And around this time, your wife started to have some health issues too. So talk to us about your wife's health issues and how they connected and correlated back to your health issues.
Yeah. So, and this was a little bit after I had, this is probably a year later, but my wife started getting sick, and immediately went to the doctor, and the doctor said, "We need to get a Lyme test on you because of your husband." And so hers came back positive as well. And at that time, the doctors that we had talked to said that Lyme wasn't sexually transmitted, but or they didn't know if it was. But looking back, it seems like that happens all the time. And so that's my best guess, because she never saw a tick either. She wasn't outside as much at this point in our lives, because we were just trying to take care of ourselves. And so that's my guess at how she got Lyme. She was really sick. Fortunately for her, she honestly got really sick really fast, which led us to the conclusion that she has Lyme, and getting that test and everything, and getting treatment right away. She went on oral antibiotics, just kind of your typical doxy, but with more, I think double the dosages that they're used to giving out. And she was better within several months. And so the weird thing, which I hated seeing her sick. At the same time, she was able to feel what it is like to have Lyme, to feel really sick. And so we were kind of in it together at that point where we both felt like, okay, we both know what this is like. This sucks. We don't dream this on anyone. And she was able to kind of empathize with me there.
So how long was your wife on doxycycline for?
Yeah, I think by the end of her treatment, it was probably close to a year that she was actually on it. She stayed on after symptoms were gone because doctors wanted to make sure that they had kind of overtreated it to make sure that there wasn't hidden bacteria there replicating that was going to come back.
So now circling back to your Lyme journey, were you treated with oral antibiotics as well?
Yeah, so actually, by the time my wife was treated, I was at a different doctor. At the Bourne Clinic, they did a lot of things that seemed to work well with other people that just didn't work well with me. As far as there was IV blood treatment where my blood would go through this IV light and kind of clean the blood, kill bacteria, and come back inside me. Acupuncture, did a bunch of diet things, did vitamin C IVs as well, which some of that stuff made me feel a little bit better and could have contributed to my health. But at the same time, none of it really helped me get better. I was still in some ways, I felt like physically, maybe I was improving a little bit, but my mental state, my cognitive impairment was getting worse. And so I ended up getting referred to another doctor. And that's kind of where I ended up seeing some progress.
So Pastor, while you were doing this IV blood therapy, diet, acupuncture, and IV vitamins, were you also taking oral antibiotics?
Yeah, I was doing oral doxycycline, and they switched it up a couple different times to see if I had different reactions to different antibiotics. And I can't remember the name of the other drugs, but they did switch it up a couple times. And so, no, I wasn't seeing progress though. I just wasn't really making a big difference in my health and wasn't getting better.
So why do you think your wife got better on Doxy alone, and yet you were on Doxy and some other treatment protocols and you didn't get better? Do you think it's because it took you longer to get diagnosed and your wife got a much quicker diagnosis and therefore she was more likely to heal from the disease?
That's my belief, is that we caught it with her as soon as she started showing symptoms. And 2+ years into mine, I feel like the bacteria had replicated enough that it was just a bigger thing to deal with. And so for her, even though she felt really sick, I felt like they caught it early enough where it didn't take long once she was on Doxy to start feeling better. And so even though it was a year-long treatment, it was still something that she saw progress pretty immediately with the Doxy.
So let's talk about dosing for you. So you mentioned earlier that your wife was treated with more than the recommended dose of Doxy. So we know that typically people are prescribed doxycycline 100 milligrams twice a day for a total of 200 milligrams daily. What dosing was your wife on, and what dosing were you on when you were doing your first treatment for Lyme disease?
Yeah, so we were both on double that. And that was based on being on forums where we were talking to other people with Lyme at that point. And everyone was kind of saying, if you really do have Lyme, you should do double. And so we were doing 200 milligrams twice a day for 400 a day.
Now, were you doing anything else to combat the gut health issues that come along with antibiotics and possible other complications that can come from antibiotics? Or were you just focusing on antibiotics at that time?
I was on a crazy diet, lost a ton of weight, which I didn't really have much weight to lose at that point. And so I was not eating anything that caused inflammation. And so it was really, really, raw foods. It was a bunch of pickled foods, pickled vegetables and stuff for the gut health. And that's kind of it. And I mean, it was like bone broth and pickled vegetables for a couple of years. And I'm not sure if that was, I think probably for my gut health, that was probably good. I do think I probably underate and lost strength that maybe was bad for me in a sense too, looking back on it, because I felt like I was withering away and maybe could have used some more protein during that.
So how long were you on this treatment protocol for before you realized it wasn't working? You had to pivot to something else?
About a year. So I was on for about a year, and I felt like the doctors were doing everything that they had seen work and knew how to treat me for it, but it just wasn't happening for me. And so um, that's when I heard stories. I knew two people, or I met two people that had gotten completely better and had Lyme very severely, were in bed and were now living normal lives. And so that's what led me to the next doctor that I saw. Um, and so he was near Detroit. He was kind of this mad genius type of infectious disease specialist. And because of his treatment stuff, I don't know if I want to name his name in this episode, but it was there were many stories of people that got completely better by going to this guy. I at first started and he did a bunch of testing just to make sure that what he saw was the same thing that my previous doctor saw. And then he put me on oral antibiotics, and he kept giving me these cognitive tests. And I didn't really understand why. I mean, you could tell that I wasn't processing right, but I kept, for whatever reason, passing these tests that he was doing. Looking back, I knew that he actually wanted me to fail the test. And so I eventually did fail it because I was having a really bad day at one of my visits with him. And he said, "Okay, now we're good to go." I'm like, "What do you mean by that?" He's like, "Now we're good to go." And so he ordered a MRI or CAT scan for my brain, and he found a sinus infection, which is what he wanted to find, so that he could then treat me with IV antibiotics for that.
Earlier on with your doctor prior to this, you mentioned that you got double the recommended dose of doxy because that's what you'd read in the forums, and that's certainly a lot of studies behind that, including Dr. Burascano, that indicate that's the proper dosing for Lyme. But how did you get your doctor to prescribe that and risk their license potentially, and also setting up all kinds of red flags about you getting double the dose of doxycycline?
I don't know. They just did it. I talked to them and showed them the posts from the Lyme forums and some doctors that were saying that this was the correct protocol, and they just did it. So I don't know what they had to do on their side of things to get around that or to make that okay. But I appreciate that they tried, that they did it.
Pastor John, for those who are listening and need a Lyme literate doctor and are desperate to get help, can they DM you? Can they contact you? Can they email you to get the name of this doctor who helped save your life?
100%. Sent many people to him. Yep.
It just seems so bizarre now that this mad scientist doctor who is known to have cured many people with Lyme disease and helped many people with Lyme disease, that he was waiting for you to fail a cognitive test. Then he wanted you to have a sinus infection so he can get you IV antibiotics. And was this all just to game the insurance companies? And I shouldn't say game, but just to get you the proper treatment because current rules and regulations wouldn't allow it for chronic Lyme. So we had to find another way to get you the treatment you needed, sort of off label for Lyme disease.
Sadly, yes. And he never went into any of that because I think he was protecting himself and probably protecting me too. But yeah, looking back on it, it's 100% because chronic Lyme, one, isn't covered by insurance, but two, isn't something that I don't know if he was able to treat off label like that. And so I think he was risking himself in treating me. And so my gratitude to him is huge because that's what ultimately ended up working for me.
It's wild that you can get IV antibiotics, no questions asked, for a sinus infection, but when you're suffering from late stage Lyme with crippling fatigue and people that are bed bound can't get IV antibiotics, but somebody with a sinus infection can. That's just sort of mind blowing from our perspective. Absolutely. So talk to us about the process of now getting a PICC line put in, what that was like for you, and now getting the IV antibiotics administered.
Yeah, the PICC line, man, that was at this point in my life, I'd been through 4 years of being sick, having a fever every day, and mentally just being drained. And I'd never been anxious or depressed before, but I was anxious and depressed at this time. And so I went in for this PICC line, and I was so nervous, and they're putting this tube into your arm that goes all the way to your heart to feed the antibiotics, and that process was, it was probably one of the most difficult things for me to actually go through, because I just felt like, I mean, I don't know. It was so nerve wracking. I was anxious. I was not handling it well at that point. Looking back, I feel like today I'd probably be fine if I had to go in for that. But the mental state that I was in, it was tough. And so they put the PICC line in, and then basically they had a nurse show up to my house once a week and change my bandages and show me how to administer the IV. And so every day for about 7 months, I sat for about 3 hours while antibiotics dripped into my body. And so kind of an intense way to take care of this, but I appreciate that they were able to do it.
So, Pastor Dan, we know you didn't make much progress the first year with the oral antibiotics and some of these other alternative treatment protocols. Talk to us what it was like in the beginning days, the first few days, the first few weeks. Were you noticing anything at the early stages of getting the IV antibiotics?
Yeah, so I herxed quite a bit, which means that I had a crazy response. I felt like my head was like not, I mean, I was already, cognitively impaired, but I felt like I was out of my body in some ways, dizzy. I had vertigo, and the doctors just told me, "Hey, you're gonna feel weird. It's just kind of push through it. We're gonna keep going." And so, yeah, to me, after reading everything that I've read, that was in some ways encouraging, but it's a little bit scary too, because some of it is like, is this an allergy in response to these antibiotics coming in, or is this actual herx? And so it was herx, and so it's kind of weird. But if you are going through a process like that, I do want to encourage you, like, to be patient with it if you can. I've known people that did IV antibiotics, they started herxing and immediately stopped treatment. And for me, if I would have done that, I feel like I wouldn't have seen the progress that I saw.
So, Pastor Dan, do you think that the IV antibiotics would have been as effective if you didn't do your previous treatment with the oral doxycycline for a year, in combination with your acupuncture and your diet and the UV blood therapy? Or do you think that all of that was sort of a wasted effort and you would have gone right to the IV therapy from the get-go?
My honest opinion is I would have gone right to the IV therapy from the get-go. I don't know if those were wasted efforts, honestly, or not. I didn't see much progress, and the progress that I saw with the IV was pretty immediate. And so for me, I know that worked. And it seems like that's not the story for everyone else. And so I feel like it would be bad stewardship of me to tell other people that, man, you have to follow my path in this. What happens is people reach out to me because I've gotten better, and they want to know exactly what I did, and I tell them, but I'm like, but this may or may not work for you. I just don't know enough about the science. I'm not a doctor. I'm not able to give you more insight than the fact that I was sick. This is what helped me.
So let's talk through the rest of your IV antibiotic journey. How long did the herxing last, and when did you start to feel better on the IV antibiotics?
Yeah, so I think I herxed for, I don't know, 2 weeks probably in the beginning, and then honestly immediately started feeling somewhat better. And so it started happening fast. I feel like the fevers were completely gone after 2 months of that. And I still was weak from just being sick for so long, but as far as like symptoms, my joint pain was pretty much gone after 2 months. And it was pretty quick in my mind after being sick for almost 5 years at this point, to feel like, whoa, in 2 months, this IV has really done some work, and I'm at least close to being better.
So how long in total were you on IV antibiotics for?
I was on for 7 months. And so, and I feel like 4 months I felt like better. And then my doctor just said, let's go a couple more months just to make sure. I don't want to go through this again with you. I don't want you to have to. And so they did the same thing that they did with my wife with the oral antibiotics. They just said, let's make sure that we kill the bacteria here. And so we're going to go a couple extra months here. And so that's what we did.
Now, was it the same antibiotic? Was it the IV ceftriaxone, or was it a combination of different IV antibiotics that they were sort of cycling or changing up for you?
It was a combination of different, and he mentioned the biofilms and the fact that the Lyme would adjust to the treatment, and so he was trying to trick it. In my mind, it seemed like he did that pretty well because he had figured it out, and it started working pretty fast. And so it was every couple weeks he was changing up the formula they were sending me.
So what were you doing for your gut health at this point? Were you doing anything else now that you're on the IVs? Because they're even stronger. Or were you just continuing on with your strict diet and, you know, pickled foods and things like that were helping balance out your gut health to sort of counter the damage being done with antibiotics?
Yeah, I was doing that and drinking probiotic drinks. So we were doing kombucha and other drinks that my wife she's a researcher, so she was finding all these different things, and I probably had more probiotic in me than anything else at that point. So she was taking care of me with that stuff.
So it sounds like about 4 months into the antibiotics, the IV antibiotics, you were about 95% better, if not in full remission at that point.
I believe so. Yeah, it seemed that way.
So my final question before I hand it back over to Rich is, I know you talked about earlier that you saw a brain injury focused therapist who helped you overcome some what you think may have been brain damage from Lyme disease. So talk to us about how you think you got the brain damage, and second, how this therapy helped you.
Yeah. So we had a friend that worked in the medical field that referred me to this, and she mostly worked with brain trauma, ex-military people who had been hurt in combat situations. But she was interested in working with someone that had experienced Lyme disease because they knew that there's neurological damage that happens when you have Lyme. And so she basically was a therapist. And so she worked through the anxiety that had grown in me, the depression that I was feeling, but also kind of retrained my brain and gave me confidence that, cognitively I could get back to most of who I was before. And so she just worked through me. We did EMDR. And so a lot of different things. She used a ton of different therapies. Probably one of the most significant things that she did for me was honestly, I'd never taken a psych eval before. And so she did a psych eval with me and did an IQ test. And her point, she told me this beforehand, was to prove that I'm more there than I thought I was, and that I was seeing more progress and was going to get to a place of more health than I expected that I would be. And so that really did that. So the results of that were pretty encouraging to me. And so that might have been the best part of the therapy, honestly, just her encouragement through that stuff. She did a bunch of other treatments that were for sure helping my brain come back to where it needed to be. But that was a unique piece to this too. That's a type of doctor that I'd never seen and had never experienced therapy or treatment through that stuff, but it was super helpful.
So then let's talk about your faith journey when you're going through now the healing process. What impact was the healing process having on your understanding of the role that suffering was playing in your life? And when did you begin to believe that you could heal?
Yeah. Let me take that second one first. I think I began to believe that I could heal when I talked to those two people that had been to this doctor, and they had gotten better. Because up to that point, every single person that I'd talked to who had Lyme still had Lyme, and they were still sick and they were still battling it. And so I was honestly more depressed with every person that I talked to. And when I talked to them, and they didn't know each other, and they both had the same doctor. So that was encouraging to me. This isn't like some scam they're setting up on me. And so I was hopeful there. I really, when a few weeks after I started the IV antibiotics and started feeling better, I was like blown away. Like, this might actually be real. I might actually be able to gain health back. And so for me, that was when I started believing. As far as the suffering, I'd say there are multiple things that happened throughout my journey that caused me to feel like, okay, there's a plan for this. There's purpose for this. It's not my plan or purpose, but maybe it's God's plan. Um, One of those things was photography came out of this whole thing. And I my primary care physician had told me, because he saw me just wasting away, he said, you need to do something active. Go walk for 20 minutes a day if you can. Even if you're in bed the rest of the day, go walk for 20 minutes. So that's what I did. I walked for 20 minutes a day and took my iPhone and started taking little pictures of just, a trail that I was on or something. I was exhausted, but then I post that to Instagram, and for whatever reason, those pictures started getting like little bits of attention, and friends were encouraging and telling me that you have an eye for this stuff. And then I had a friend loan me his camera. So the first camera that I ever shot was a first generation Canon 5D Mark One, 12 megapixels. It's not as powerful as my iPhone is now. But I was stood on this hill and there was a storm coming in, and underneath the storm was a sunset. And I took this picture and just thinking like, this is a pretty cool shot here. And this is gonna go well on Instagram. And so I posted it up there and was contacted by an insurance company. And they said, hey, we saw your picture on Instagram. We're doing a new campaign. Could we buy that from you? And so I'm like, sure. And I'm like, how much? And they're like, how about $500? And so I'm like, absolutely. Like, this is like not my job at all. So the fact that you want to buy this picture for $500 is great. Well, that picture ended up being their 100-year anniversary, whole big marketing campaign, and it was on billboards across the country. And so I had friends that would send me, they'd be in California and they'd send me a picture of the billboard. And I was on a trip to the Badlands in South Dakota and saw a billboard and took a picture of it. And so it was this crazy thing that kind of led to a side career of working with a bunch of brands and restaurants and lifestyle products and all kinds of things. And so tons came from that, which it wouldn't have happened without Lyme disease for sure, because it came from taking those 20-minute walks. So I did a gallery that I called Prescribed Walks. That was kind of basically all these pictures that were taken on these walks that I was told to take by my doctor. And so that came out of it. Honestly, a lot of relationships with people that had Lyme disease came out of this too. Some of them are stories that were encouraging, where I was able to help them get treatment. And then some of them were, I talked to this one lady, she was in her mid-50s. She called me because I was a pastor and because I had Lyme disease. But she was 14 years into having Lyme and really sick, couldn't get out of bed at all, and was honestly dying. And she didn't want my advice on treatment or any of that, but she didn't know many people that had been through similar things. And her husband encouraged her to call me and say, hey, can you ask this pastor to pray with you? And so I spent several weeks, once a week on the phone with her, just talking through how she's doing and praying with her. And she eventually passed away. And so some of that, being able to be there in situations that were important in other people's lives, I wouldn't have had the empathy or the experience or the knowledge or the understanding to sit with people in the middle of some of what they were going through. So looking back, you see a ton of different things that kind of came out of this that were encouraging to me. And I see a plan and I see a purpose.
Talk to us about what you've learned about yourself, meaning what traits, what God-given traits do you have, or what pieces of your creativity that you now understand that you would never have understood had you not gone through the suffering of Lyme disease?
Yeah, I feel like this might not really answer your question, but I feel like I've slowed down intentionally now, because I was moving so fast before Lyme disease. And so I felt like our lives were really almost hectic. I was kind of a workaholic, but also like did a ton of stuff with our family too. Now I'm like just slower paced on purpose. I feel like when I got healthy, I could have made the choice to kind of run back into the hectic lifestyle that we were in before, but saw some good that came out of slowing down and spending more time with less people. And so for me, that's been a product of this. As far as like, who I am and what kind of traits I've seen in myself, I think that this has just honestly been a place where I've learned empathy for a lot of people that I wouldn't have even seen before maybe. And so one of the things that kind of came out of this is I'd never experienced depression or anxiety. And even though I knew that there were medical reasons for both of those in a lot of cases, to me, I felt like, okay, can you choose not to be anxious? Like that seems like if you can choose not to be anxious, then let's not be anxious. Um, that was really immature to think that way, and seeing how my brain disability through Lyme disease impacted my anxiety, and being sick for that long impacted my depression, helped me to have empathy and sit with other people and be patient with other people and love on other people that were going through similar things, even if it wasn't caused by Lyme disease. It could be a variety of reasons, but it kind of allowed me to sit in that mess a little bit with people in a way that I think's been super helpful for me as a pastor to be able to do.
Pastor Dan, let me ask you the final question that we ask all of our guests on Tick Boot Camp. And I'm going to use one of your children as an example. So if God forbid, after this podcast, and we again thank you for doing this podcast while you're out camping, if while your children were running around in the woods while you were doing this podcast, and you exited the car and you went into the tent, one of your children had a tick biting them, what would you do so that your child would not have to go on the terrible Lyme disease journey that both you and your wife had to go on?
Yeah, well, I would tweeze the tick out, and I would probably go and watch a refresher video on the right way to do that, because I know that you can do that the wrong way and leave the head of the tick and you can force them to regurgitate more bacteria, and so you want to do that properly. I would get the tick out and send it in to be tested. And I would honestly automatically try to convince the doctors to give them the double dose of doxycycline, and put them on that one way or another for at least a month, and probably get them tested as well. So hopefully that won't happen.
Thank you for listening to the Tick Boot Camp interview with our guest, Pastor Dan Price. To our listeners, we have a call to action. First, if you'd like to learn more about Pastor Dan, please visit his Instagram page at Dan Price Photo. Second, if you enjoyed this episode of the Tick Boot Camp podcast, please share with your friends by using the social media buttons you see at the bottom of our post. Third, Tick Boot Camp has created a Tick Bite blueprint that has been inspired by the information that has been shared with us by past podcast guests. We urge you to visit our website at www.tickbootcamp.com to view the blueprint. Please note we would appreciate any input or any improvements you would like to share. Fourth, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play Music, or Spotify to get your automatic episode updates of our Tick Boot Camp podcast. And finally, we thank you, our community, for your comments on our past podcast episodes. Please take a minute to leave us an honest review on iTunes, on Instagram, or on our website. We make it a point to read every single one of the reviews we get. Thank you for listening.